Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. Shiva Ayadure. Today, we're going to be doing a discussion on a very important topic that's very, very timely. And the discussion is what is going on in France? And we're going to be doing a systems analysis of this. And my colleague joining me on this is we have a special, very important guest, James Richardson. James is actually out of France. He's one of our Truth, Freedom, and Health warrior scholars, and James will give a little bit of background, but he lives in France, on the border of France and Germany, Strasbourg. But we're going to be going into a deep discussion today to really talk about what is going on in France with James. But we're going to be doing a systems analysis. Many of you know that the approach that we take here in our movement for Truth, Freedom, and Health, and if people want to know more about that there's a banner running down there, truthfreedomhealth.com, is we teach people the science of systems. And in this discussion, you're going to realize why important system science is necessary if we're serious about looking at the world and understanding what's going on. I would say most people have no idea what's going on in France. They just see people burning buildings down or heard the story about some kid getting shot and the cops shooting him and then people getting angry. And that's pretty much it. But it's very, very important to look at events that take place and recognize, as I did in the swarm video recently, that things are interconnected. Nothing takes place in isolation. And sometimes you have to unwind the movie to see how this started so you can actually project it into the past. So James, how are you? James?
I'm doing fine, Dr. Shiva. Thank you.
James, what time is it there?
Now it's about 9 o'clock, 9:02.
Yeah, sorry, James. I had thought we were going to start at 3, and I was told it was at 2, but it's good to have you. But tomorrow is July 4th here in Massachusetts. And James, if you can just take less than 30 seconds, 1 minute, just give people your background. You know, you grew up in Bronx and you live there. You have a whole family there. Go ahead, James.
Yes, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I went into the Air Force at an early age of about 19, and I became an aircraft mechanic and working on weapons systems. An aircraft is a weapon. This is platform. It's a system. And this is where we were called systems engineers, aircraft systems engineers. And I was stationed out in Asia. I've lived in Thailand. I've lived in Singapore. I've lived in Hong Kong and Malaysia. So I've been in Southeast Asia. I went to Asia, and it was there that I became very familiar with the Asian people. The people we looked at the people and said, wow, they look funny. And they were looking at me saying, wow, you look funny, you know? But I learned them, and I learned the language, and I just learned the culture, and I learned to respect them. And I understood that what Dr. Shiva has been teaching, systems science, it's a way of life. And the Asians do live this way of life.
Yeah, one of the books we have, James, is called Your System, Your Life. This is not to, you don't have to buy any of my books. By the way, when you become a Truth from Health warrior, you get all of this. But I'm very proud of this book called System and Revolution. And the reason I want to bring this up is that when we say system science, it was starting around in the 1900s in the world that system science became a field of research and endeavor. And across my 4 degrees at MIT, and James, the training you got, it took me many, many years. I used to teach system science to really understand how to teach system science, but more importantly, the field. And then I interconnected the principle of system science to what we call ancient systems of medicine, and realized that the systems are actually the same, and we built a curriculum. James is a Truth from Health warrior scholar. He's in our leadership program in Europe, but we train anyone. You don't have to have any background as long as you're keen and willing and want to apply yourself, whether you're a hairdresser, whether you're a car mechanic, whether you're a PhD. I'm committed to teaching people system science because system science is what allows us to go beyond left and right, look through the chaos, find out what the real problem is and what the real solution is. So when we look at France today, James, I thought the way we could proceed is I was going to give a little bit of overview about how the political system in the United States works, how decision-making works. And because we're going to end with that, because I'm sort of going to give the punchline away what the solution is. And then I want to unwind to starting with sort of the apparent thing that recently occurred in France with the 17-year-old boy being shot. And then if you could sort of just give us, I'm sure people are interested in knowing what's going on, as we talked about, in Marseille, Lyon, right, Grenoble, where all the riots are taking place. What's the situation now? If we take about 10 minutes on that. And then I thought we would then start applying systems principles to dig through this and understand the big interconnected issues, right? The poverty, the immigration issue, the pension systems, the many wage issues, the declining population in France, and interconnect all these, because it's not any one thing. It's a combination of things. So James, maybe you can just take a couple of minutes here and just say to people who don't know, assume people have been not watching TV or anything, like what happened in the last 5 days, how this occurred, and what's going on now, before we get into the analysis. James, just if you could just give us sort of the visceral facts.
Well, I'm sure that you've heard about the violence that is going on here, but let's talk about what triggered it, and then we can understand the hatred, the disenchantment with the authorities that is going on here. A young man was stopped in a car, and the police ordered him to get out of the car, to exit the car, and to turn off the motor. Instead of doing that, he raced the motor up. He began to move the car forward, and then he geared the car to go forward, and the policeman was standing just next to his window, and he shot him, and unfortunately, the man died. The policeman was held by his superiors, and I think at present he's incarcerated. He's being detained, but this man was known by the police to have known to not be non-compliant in the past, and so the police understood, and this has caused his death. And from that time, in the area where he was shot, which was a suburb of Paris, it caused the people there began to just get angry with the police when they understood that the man was dead, and they began to just riot and set fires to cars, to garbage cans. They just began to riot, and that went on all night. That was last Tuesday. That went all night into Wednesday, and Wednesday they continued to riot. Into Thursday, it spread throughout France. The major areas of France in the south and the center and in the north of France, they began to riot there also. It's the electronic age and the social media has reduced the world to just a global village. And in this global village, they were able to contact and to reach out to their friends that they had in this city and that city and the other cities, and to give them information as to what happened. And there was a journalist that filmed this entire incident. And so they understood that the policeman was there, and with his head in the car, and his colleague mentioned to him, which was on the tape, shoot him. And this is what the policeman did. And it has caused France to become just the unrest that is going on here. It's just terrible. In my city, I live in Strasbourg.
Now, James, 1 second. So that incident occurred right outside of France, and I think people
outside of Paris, yes,
outside of Paris. So people need to understand that you have the cities, right, where only wealthy people can afford to live there, and outside of the cities, you have these housing complexes, right?
Yes,
like
yes.
You would call affordable housing or low-cost housing in the United States.
Social housing, yes.
Right, and there, I forget the term, banlieue. How do you say that? Banlieue. So there are these, there are these housing complexes. And so this incident didn't occur in Paris. It occurred in those housing complexes outside of Paris, right?
Yes.
And when the incident occurred, I think you made the point earlier, because of social media, had this incident occurred in 1980, like Rodney King in the United States, people would have been riots only in Paris. but because of social media, people then saw it in other parts of France. So outside Marseille, those housing complexes went.
Yes, in the
Right.
banlieue and each of those cities, they all have banlieues around them.
Right.
Marseille, yes.
And these banlieues again are, you have the central city, and then you have outside of them, you have these housing complexes, which are pretty much filled with very poor, indigent, unemployed people, people of they're French citizens, but typically of ethnic origin, right? From North Africa.
Let me say low income. This is second or third generation immigrants.
Second or third. So they came from Tunisia, Algeria, etc. But they're French residents.
They're French.
French residents who live in these banlieues. So, but I think the point is, when that incident took place, it wasn't just contained into Paris. I think you were saying that people came into Paris, right?
They came into Paris from the banlieue around Paris. Yes.
But it also split. So which were the cities again, James? Just to let people know.
It was Marseille. Here in Strasbourg, they had some. Lyon, Grenoble, and
Paris. Right. So Grenoble is more on the west, right?
In the Alps. Grenoble is in the Alps.
I'm sorry, in the Alps. Marseille is in the south. Lyon is sort of central east, right? Paris is north, in the northeast in some ways.
Bordeaux.
Yeah. So it hit everywhere, right?
Yes.
What is the situation now, James? Is it calming down? Because we were told, the Guardian said that only 3,000 people were arrested, but you're saying it's a lot more than that, or 3,000.
Well, we can't say. We can only see what the media is reporting. But at the present, it seems to be calming down, especially here in Paris, here in Strasbourg, and in the other areas. But I think that the media has begun to put a blackout on what is happening now.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what took place. Now, this young boy who was shot, you said that he had a history of violence, right?
According to the police, they knew him.
History of being arrested, and that's just starting to emerge, right? I've seen some reports of that.
He was a non-compliant individual.
Non-compliant individual. Okay, right. So James, so that's what occurred now, right? About these kinds of racial incidents erupting, they occur from time to time, but nothing has occurred of this magnitude, right?
No, that is spread through the whole country.
Right. And why do you think this is different, James, because there have been a lot of the ethnic minority or majority, however, reports that the police harass them, they get humiliated, there's people being shot. So someone just said he was a gang member, right? Ellen Bloom Demaris, right? But what made this situation different, James?
Well, in these banlieues, they go to the same school, and they come home, and they don't have the benefit of having the parents there. Perhaps the parents are working; they must work, and then they're able to congregate together. But you have low wages also. And then you have just the standard of living that in these areas, the fuel prices, and just frustration among these individuals. But they're able to vent that frustration in other ways. They have the football games and things like this through sports. And this just now happened to replace all of the sports and all of the other extracurricular activities, and they have just focused on being destructive and confronting the police, who they consider to be their enemy.
So James, let's sort of look at, so at this point in history, late June 2023, early July 2023, we're witnessing sort of 5 days in the news of this violence, right? So if you were just to look at this one slice in the long, it's like basically, imagine a 2.5 hour movie, and I only come in and I watch the last 10 seconds of it. And you would never really have an idea what took place. So we're watching this last 10 seconds, and we're looking at one aspect of this with this youth, right? predominantly 17, 18. It's I think they said 50% of the people arrested were average age was 17, if I remember.
That's
Okay.
correct.
So that's youth. Okay. So you have this set of youth who you can put all sorts of adjectives to: desperate, disadvantaged, feeling that they have no future, hopeless, all those kind of things, right? But if we take that problem of the youth, I would say from a systems piece, that's one big piece. And I think we want to talk about that. The other big systems component here, that's only one component. If we were to just say it's the youth, it's a bunch of immigrant youth who are pissed off and they have no values and they're bad people, I think that would just not capture the whole story. There's another piece here, which is the fact that less than, 2 months ago, you had these huge protests that were taking place in France, which people probably forgot, given how people's memories are becoming, is massive, massive demonstrations because of Macron, who is a former investment banker. He came into office on the pledge that he was going to reform the pension system. And in 2019, he was going to implement the pension system changes. COVID occurred and he wasn't able to. And a couple of months ago, he began implementing that. So that was the other thing, the pension system. The third piece of this, I think, also should be not ignored, is the fact that if we forget right before COVID in 2019, people, again, forget this. There were massive millions and millions of people protesting on the street in France with the yellow vest protests.
2018 to 2019.
Yes, because of the fuel prices escalating and the cost. So 2018, 2019, you had these massive yellow vest protests. Then you had recently, about 2 months ago, the pension system protests. And now you have the youth protests, right? Which has led to this. And then the fourth piece of it, James, I think we should also talk about a systemic piece here, is the fact that the infrastructure in France, in these Benelux, there's the poverty rates. In many of these Benelux, the poverty rate is 50%. 50% of the people are below the poverty line. It's not 25%. We're talking about 50%. And I have an example that I'd like to walk people through. But when you look at this, the people, if you can speak to it, how have the French government, they had the fuel prices in France in 2018, 2019, right? The yellow vest, then the pension stuff, poverty in many of these Benelux are over, 50%. And then the recent, what is the political dynamic there? What is their solution to all of this, James?
Well, they don't have a solution. Now the president, he does not have a majority in the assembly anymore. And you have the extreme left, which is saying one thing, and the extreme right is saying another. The extreme left, they want immigration, they want more education, they want to spend more money on the people, you could say. This is what they say. And on the right, they want to stop immigration, they want order, and they want police, more policemen on the streets. And this is the conflict there. So between the two of them, there's no solution being offered. You just have...
So James, let me repeat that. So the right wing is saying close the borders, don't let the immigrants in. Sounds a lot like the US, right?
That's right.
The immigrants are the problem. These foreigners, these African, Islamic foreigners, they don't like to drink wine. They're the problem, right? That's one. And then the left says we need to have them come in because what? For labor?
We have to help the refugees. I think when you saw the refugee crisis,
Yep.
The refugees came in and they were just inviting them in, and we have to help the refugees. Now in Eastern Europe, you have the refugees are coming also. And so they're coming in, and the left is saying, we welcome all of these refugees to come in.
Right. And that's very similar to the United States, right? You have Biden saying, let's open the borders. We should accept these people. And the right wing says these foreigners are the problem. Let's shut down the borders. Am I right?
That's right.
And that's pretty much it, right? And by the way, that solution of the left and right, how many years has that been going on in France, James?
Oh, it's been going on for quite a long time.
How long have you been there, James? And you've heard that same sort of mantra, the left saying this and the right saying this.
Since the President Sarkozy, during his time.
So that's what, 1990?
Yeah, 1990. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was during President Sarkozy, where he was he was a right wing, the extreme right wing, and he wanted more policemen, he wanted more order, and he wanted to just begin to even send some of the immigrants back to their country. He wanted to do that, and this is what he was promoting. So when Macron came along, well, he was saying something different. He was a middle of the roader, where he was more on the left than on the right. But he was.
There was also another president, right, between Sarkozy and Macron. What was the guy's name? Huh?
Roland.
No, but there's another guy with the glasses. Huh?
Hollande.
Oh, Holland. Yeah, yes. I remember I met him the last time I was in France. He showed up to a very small event I was at with his girlfriend or his mistress, which is quite interesting. But what was he considered, left or right?
He was left.
He was left. Okay.
He was a socialist.
Right. So basically, Sarkozy. So you have a right-wing guy saying police, we need to law and order, and then you have the other extreme. Or the other left solution, which is like, we need to help the immigrants, right? We need to help, and that's pretty much it, right? And they play each side.
That's what they do. They're just playing it off, and
yeah,
where they are now, they don't have a solution.
Right. All right. So I think that's helping our audience understand. So you have this eruption take place, the fundamental issues of the pension system, which we should talk about, the fact that fuel prices, and then some of the problems are not even being discussed openly and publicly. One of the problems that I think that's not discussed is the fact that the fertility rates are dropping in Paris or in France. And let's talk a little bit about the pension system. When do people retire typically, James?
Now they were retiring at 62. And that was the issue last month, a couple of months ago, where Macron, he managed to sort of like dictate that he's going to raise it to 64 without getting the votes in the assembly. And so they just passed it and they raised it to 64. The courts all agreed with him. So now the pension rate, the retirement age is 64. And this has caused a lot of people some distress here.
Yeah, and so when we look at the pension system, so people were retiring when, James? At 60, I thought, right?
62.
Oh, 62. Okay. So I have some data that I wanted to share with people here, James. Let me share this data here. This data shows, I think it's very relevant to understand the system's dynamic here. And the system dynamic here that I want to share here is that, so if you are retiring at, let's go back to 62, right? That means when you retire, France has one of the best, I think, relatively to the developed nations, a very, very, I don't want to say generous, but they really support the elderly people because they didn't want people to be in poverty, right? So they have a pretty good social program.
But they've paid into this for their entire working life.
Right. So they paid into it for their entire working life. So if you look at this graph, I wanted to share. I want people to look at the bottom left graph. What this bottom, can you see it, James?
Yes, I can see it.
So this bottom left graph, the left side is women and the right side is men. Forget the top graph. We'll come back to that. But if someone were to retire, so by the way, women, the life expectancy of a woman in France is 87. Okay. The life expectancy of a man is 81. So if you retire at 60, let's say, what did you say, 64?
64.
Previously yeah. 62. So if you retire at 64, this was when someone was retiring at 60. It's a couple of years old. But if you were if you adjust, if you're retiring at 64, you're living to 87, that means you can see right here, you basically have to support that person for another 87 minus 20 minus 27 minus 87 minus 64 is what? 23 years. Okay. So a woman would need to be supported for 23 years, and a man would need to be supported for 20 this is 80
19 years.
Yeah, 19 years, right? 19. So a man needs to be supported for 19 years, a woman for 23 years, okay? So that's an important number to remember. So if you are a woman, the system, and you retire and you've paid into it, there must be enough money to support a woman until she's 87, right? That means if she retires when she's 64, for the next 23 years, there better be enough money in the French kitty, right? Treasury to support her. And if you're a man, for 19 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Now, as I understand, James, is when Macron came into office, if I'm right, one of his biggest reforms was that he was going to reform the pension system.
Yes.
You could probably, speak to it more, but can you tell us a little bit about that when you came? I have some data, but it'd be good to hear from you. Like what, when Macron came into office, that was a big piece of his thing, right?
Yeah, he didn't mention the retirement age at that time. He just wanted to change the amount that everybody paid in. That was the reform.
Yeah, he wanted to increase it, right?
Reform the health benefits that everyone was getting. You had to pay more. You had to make it over what you were receiving from from the government. You had to pay more. Those were the reforms that he was looking at.
Right, and the reason he was looking at that, James, is, as I understand, is right now, if you work, let's say you make $100,000 a year, 7% of your income gets taken out, right, every year to go into your pension fund, which would be like 7,000, and then the employer contributes another 10%, which would be 10,000, but overall, so 17%. But overall of the gross wages, they also take out some other stuff, but it comes to 24%. One of the highest in the developed nations. At 24% of your gross wages are taken out and they get put in.
That's correct.
Right. Now, what I understand was happening was that the way that the pension system is done, it's like a Ponzi scheme, meaning it's dependent on, a Ponzi scheme works on always getting new people coming in. So what happens is let's say you have 100 people retired today. The 100, you have to have at least 100 people who are working because there's no money really saved. It's the new people are funding the people, the people already paid into it, right? So if at time t equals 0, if 100 people were the first employees working, they're paying money into the French system. They retired 64, right? Mm-hmm. But because a lot of that pension money was used for other things, there's really no money. The only way that those people can get their money, the person who retired 64, is from the 24% they're taking from people who are working.
Yes.
So it's a Ponzi scheme because you have to have enough inflow of people coming in to support the people who've retired. And this is
continuous.
What's that?
It must be continuous.
And it has to be continuous. So what's been happening is a number of people who are joining the workforce, new people, is declining, even though there's a big body of people sitting here who need to collect their pensions. So you don't have enough new people being employed making productive wages, right? You have to make a certain amount of wages. So as I understand it, Macron, who was a finance guy, who's an investment banker, was going to come up with a solution to do this, which is, I think what you just said, they were just going to increase what people pay in to 24% from 17%. Okay. The other statistic I wanted to share with you, James, is that when you look at this, this goes to the systemic nature of that problem before all this stuff occurred, was that in order to have enough people in the labor force, a family must at least have 2 kids because you need population to fuel your labor force.
Mhm. And now it's 1.8, I think it is.
Yeah. I found data here. Let me share it with people. This is what I have here. If we go here, it's a top graph. So starting around 2014, right here, if you can see this black line, it was flat. People are having 2 kids. And right around 2014, it's dropped. Okay. So about 1.9 kids. Okay. And this is where it's sort of headed. So you're not having enough, and it can either go this way, it could go this way, unlikely, right? If it's possible. This is where it needs to go to get back to parity, right here, that big dashed line, but it's actually headed in this direction right now. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The projections are it could go in this direction, potentially here. Okay.
Mhm.
So this is where we're at. So you have a pension system which is reliant on new people coming into the workforce, right? But you have a decline in fertility rates. And you also have another phenomenon that many people, women, for example, are not, are also working, right?
Yes.
So if you look here, in all the countries, the elderly population is increasing, right? So people are living much longer, France included, right? Japan the most, right? But on the other hand, the percentage of one-person households is also increasing. And the reason I wanted to share this, so if you see France right here, it's right here. So there's nearly 38% of one-person households. What that means is single women, right? So you're not producing enough kids. So basically, you're not producing enough children, reduction in fertility rates, and you don't have enough people who can fund this pension system. And that, by the way, is occurring pretty much in every developed nation, United States included. The third thing, James, if you can sort of go back. So we've talked about the kids being disenfranchised, feeling whatever, those things, what's occurring recently. You have the pension system. In 2017 and 18, James, you were right there with the yellow vest protests.
Yes.
That was a very different input, right? A very different, what caused that, James?
It was a different group of people that were protesting. These were middle-aged working people that were protesting at that time, and they were protesting against the higher fuel prices. They had to commute to work and here, and this is what they were protesting about. These yellow vests. They wanted to stabilize the fuel prices and to try to lower the fuel prices, because much of the fuel prices, a large percentage of the fuel prices, was tax, and they were trying to get the tax off of the fuel, and I think they managed to get some of it off. They did subsidize some of that, but the yellow vests, they did achieve what they were after a little bit, but then they were interrupted because of the COVID.
Yes. So, and I think around that time, I did a couple of videos on this, I think back in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. One thing people need to understand, there were protests like the yellow vest protests against corruption and against inflation all over the world. There was actually 27 major protests going on. So the pandemic was very, very valuable to the elites because all those protests just went away. They're able to shut them down overnight. But so France had, again, the reason I wanted you to share that, James, those, you made an interesting point. There were middle-aged people, right?
Yes.
Middle-aged working class people.
Working class people, yes.
Right. When we looked at the pension, a little bit older people, right?
Yes.
Because they're looking at their pensions having to work longer. And now we're looking at young people. So we're looking what recently occurred with this kid being shot, right? 50% of the people arrested were 17-year-olds.
That's
so you
correct.
really have 3 segments of the French population with varying interests who feel disenfranchised. The people who are coming of age to retire, who are concerned that they're going to have to work longer, right? And they don't want to do that. When in fact, that may be the only solution to this, right? People have talked about that. I mean, short-term solution, and we'll get to that.
Either that or their benefits, their retirement benefits are reduced.
Right, right. So either they work 2 more years, so they get to fill in the pump with new working people coming in, so that when they retire, there's money in the kitty, or they retire now and they get less benefits. But that's sort of, let's say your 60-year-olds over here who are protesting, 50 to 60-year-olds, right? You have your middle class people who are protesting in 2017, 18, and now you have these young people, right? So three sort of groups of people, three systems.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the entire population.
that's what I'm trying to say. Right.
That's the whole population.
That's right. And the reason I wanted to let people understand that was every time these protests come in France, all we see in the world, in the United States, oh my God, these people are complaining about something. But no one gets into the depth of this. But what we just covered in this last 2 minutes right here, James, is there's 3 segments which represent the entire population that go down to the systemic issue. You have massive poverty, the kids being disenfranchised, young people, right? And then their interactions with the police and all that, right? We can get into and the left and the right having their views on it. The other issues with the pension system and with the high cost. I want to get your thoughts on this. There was a interesting observations in a number of the newspapers, and what they were saying, James, was that if you look again in a city, right, and then you look outside, what'd you call them, the banlieue? Banlieue, which is the housing projects, and they took an example of a housing project in the northeastern part of France, and they were saying in this housing project, 50% of the people were in poverty. Okay, 50%. All right, and they went on to describe this systemic issue that when you're a young person, in fact, the article went to talk about the fact that France, above all the other developed nations, has the worst segregation in education at the younger age group. What they said was that when a kid comes, in the United States, I think when you're around 14, you get to you're in what's called middle school, and then you get to go to the high school, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. In some places at the middle school, when you're 14, you decide whether you're going to go on the college track, like to become an engineer, doctor, or you're either going to go on the vo-tech track. In France, apparently, in many of the banlieues, a huge percentage of people, when they're 14, are forced to go down, not even the vo-tech, but to do these very menial, low productive labor jobs, which really don't produce any taxable income, which support the pension system.
Well, really, they're really not forced, but they're making this choice because it seems that it might be an easier path for them. Well, and also the families are getting subsidies from the government, and so they want to continue to go to school to receive this support.
Yeah,
and the academic results also. They don't have to worry about the academic results. They can just.
Yeah, well, this interesting analysis done by this one reporter, he said that many of these people feel that they're actually being pushed, and I think more research. That's why I wanted your perspective. They're being pushed into these manual labor, low-paid jobs instead of the lycees. Is that what they call them? Lycees that prepare the pupils for university. And again, this could be biased. They're saying that the word is that people feel humiliated because it's almost like it's a de facto that they have to go into these jobs. It's just sort of the momentum is there, and it's not to say people don't go to university, but it's a very, very small percentage. So
they have to have the academic requirements in order to proceed on to the university. And as we mentioned before, they're all living in the same neighborhood. They're going to the same school, and they don't have that social support around them to help them to educate them, to bring up their academic performance.
I mean, I'll give you an example. When I went to school at MIT, which is one of the best schools in the world, right? And it was 1981, I mean, there's this huge affirmative action thing in the US, but a very small percentage of kids were from the inner cities. A good friend of mine, Bruce, who became my CTO for one of my companies, Bruce came from the inner cities of crime-ridden Louisiana, okay, to MIT, New Orleans. And the only reason Bruce was able to do that was he had one mentor, his mother, who really loved him. His father left them when they were young. And there's been a lot of research done that shows that kids who grow up in crime-ridden, gun-ridden neighborhoods, they did interesting analysis. Who gets to graduate? Okay, like do they even make it to college or graduate even high school? And one of the things they found very, very interesting was no matter how bad the situation was in an inner city, the crime, that if there was one person that a child had who really cared about them, it could have been an extended family member, it could have been a single mom or single dad, it could have been a teacher. No matter if there were even guns, shots flying around, that kid was able to make it out of that situation. That was a consistent theme, that there was some support vehicle that no matter how bad it was, the kid made it out. I mean, my father grew up in war-torn Burma, right? He found one teacher who taught him under a mango tree, and he ended up being an engineer. This is back in the 40s, James. So, but so kids want to succeed in some sense, they want to break out, but they need at least what this research said was one support system. So my friend Bruce had his mother, and he was able to make it to MIT, right? But when I look at these Banaloos, right, and the structure, I'm wondering if the percentage of a kid even having one mentor, right, the probability is going down and down and down.
Exactly.
So and the reason I wanted to bring that up is if you look at that system of the young people, because you want to feel, because when in order to get a pension system to have, you need taxable income. But if someone's just cleaning toilets, right, or they're cleaning, you're not producing enough wage. It's not that you can tax and you can put into this. So you're producing all these very low wage jobs. That's not feeding into the superstructure that a society needs. So you have the infrastructure in many of these Benelux, which are, the infrastructure includes mentoring, the social structure, and this is occurring in the United States too. You know, only 20 out of all the tax revenue the United States gets, that's only coming from 20% of the people. Do you know that? So 80% of the people in the United States are not contributing to the 5 trillion in budget. So it's a very small subset of people who you can tax who are contributing because you're not producing high wage jobs anymore. So this is a fundamental issue that the elites have created. They've created a very systemically screwed up situation that you're not creating valuable, high productive jobs, right? So you're creating jobs which aren't productive. So that's why when you look at that one ball there, if I were to do a diagram on this, you're creating a bunch of young people at the age of 14. They're going into these low skilled manual labor jobs. They feel humiliated, as this analysis in The Guardian said, right? And so you're creating these conditions of a quote unquote wage inequality, of discrimination right in those housing projects. And I think to your wife's point, as we discussed earlier, there's no mentoring. So no one's instilling value systems in people. So you have a double-edged thing that's going low wage jobs, unproductive jobs, which you can't tax, and you have that. So that's one piece. Now you connect that phenomenon to the pension system. And I think the pension system, people who want to retire can't retire because there's not enough money. And the pension system, not only in France, but in many countries, was started because when people were retiring, most of the poverty people were elderly people because they didn't have any money. And the reason that occurred was people didn't have the behavior to save. So the government came in and said, okay, we're going to save for you. So they passed these laws saying we're going to take 17, 18% of your wages and put it into a government fund, and we'll save it for you. Mm-hmm. So, and then the other piece, James, we talked about with the war with Ukraine, prices are escalating. Inflation is going up. So you have these three interesting phenomenon taking place.
Mm-hmm.
So from a systems problem, James, what do you think? We're looking at the middle class, high prices, fuel prices. You're looking at the elderly who are leaving France. I mean, not leaving France, but um, they're concerned because they can't retire at an age that they wanted to because there's not enough money in the pension, and young people feeling hopeless in many ways. What do you think the solution here is, James, in France?
I think we've got to look at the conversion, how to convert these young people into thinkers, how to give them hope and to allow them to think. And if we can convert them into to make them thinkers, I don't know if you bring sociologists, I don't know what has to happen there, or they have to be given something to motivate them rather than what they're doing now, and that they don't pass this habit onto the next generation, because you have a lot of single mothers that are coming out of this out of these banlieues, and these young men, they are absent fathers. So we've got to find a way that we're able to convert them into productive people, and this is what you leave to. It's supposed to be the politicians to do this, but the politicians are only concerned about themselves and making the money for themselves. These are the elites. They might come from this from a different strata of the society to become politicians, but once they're there, they are influenced, or they get another agenda, or they're getting another offer from someplace, and then they forget about the people and who put them there, and they go on. Maybe they'll do a little bit here, a little bit there, plant a tree, or in the schoolyard, and just to leave these young people going among themselves and going on to do what they're going to do. But to continue like this, and if these three parts of the population, if they find a unifying point, you have revolution.
Yeah. So James, you made an interesting point about these politicians and that they're selfish. What in the United States, most politicians, the day they get into office, they're starting to campaign for their reelection. The day they get in. In the United States, the House of Representatives 2 years and the Senate is 6 years. You said in France it's 5 years.
5 years.
But is it the same thing? Like these are career politicians? They get in and most of them stay in career politics?
Some of them, but most of them are there for 5 years and they're not reelected, and then they move on. But a lot of them are sometimes career politicians, but not for many. It's not like the United States where there you have the Mitch McConnells and these people. They're not like.
But yeah, Sarkozy was in there for a while, right? I mean, they're always there, aren't they?
Supposedly he was here for 5 years, I think, and he didn't get reelected.
I see. The reason I bring that up is, if you think about it, when you run for office, you primarily, after you get elected, your job is to, if you're the president or a senator, your job, most of your work, the bills that you vote on, is how money gets allocated. And money really can get allocated into different buckets, right? Sort of infrastructure long-term, that's one bucket. The other stuff is, your short-term needs, right? Equity. Oh my God, these people, we need to help these people. They don't have money right now. Let's help them, right? And so on. But if you look at when someone gets elected, many of them get elected on the promise of always handling a short-term problem. A politician is never going to get elected saying, okay, or after they get into office, if he says, look, I have to do the right thing, we have to put in public infrastructure, right? We have to spend money here, because you're not going to see the fruits of that in 2 years or 3 years. It takes about 10 years to see the fruits of public infrastructure, the return on investment. So 95% of the politicians will never do the right thing, because many of them are getting into office either to get reelected or strike their deals, James. And I think this is what occurs in France, because they strike their deals and they make a lot of money while in office, and they have to help their friends who are outside. So their motivation is not to do the right thing. So if you look at France, what is the right thing? And I don't think it's that different than the United States, is you have to invest in infrastructure. And that infrastructure, if you go back to the young kids, is that I just wanted to share this with people. This is a phenomenon that comes out of the World Health Organization that we have. By the way, I didn't take a quick break here, but if people go to truthfreedomhealth.com, the solution for the world is really Truth Freedom Health. The only way out of this is not going to come from politicians. It's we have to get educated or be enslaved. And I'll play a video on this. But what I want people to recommend people do is there's a very interesting graph here. James, you remember this graph, right?
Yes.
That I've shared? Yeah. So everyone's got all these devices. Everyone's on TikTok. But look at this number here, James. In spite of all this information, access to, like these kids were using TikTok to organize their protests or whatever they were doing, right? Nearly 650 million people in the world are anxious and depressed. 51% of children, James, feel hopeless. 40% want to overthrow their governments. 2.5 billion people, 500 million children are obese. 50% don't even know what to eat or avoid, and 95% have health problems, with 1/3 having 5 ailments. So in the midst of all this so-called information, right, we have 51% of children feel hopeless. And I think we really need to look at this. Why is it that this is taking place? And I would argue, James, is because people have essentially lost faith or learned helplessness in their governments. Because these people, when you were sharing with me, James, what is their solution right now to solve these problems? You made an interesting point. It's I think you said send in more police or do something else.
It was to send in more police or to I lost the train. But anyway, they have to look at the output. What output do they want? That is the point there. What is the output that they want? The politicians, the people, what is the output that they want? They don't know what the output is that they want. They don't know what they want. Do they have to be told what they want?
But James, I think you said that, what's his name, Macron's currently his solution is deploy 40,000 police, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty much what his solution is. And then he went to, while France was burning, he was over partying at Elton John's concert, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. My wife told me, maybe he needs a rest, He's been working hard these past days, but France was burning and he went to see Elton John. Yeah.
Right. But I'm saying he does not, that to me, that tells me he has no solution. It's to deploy police and relax because he's probably has no solution, or his solution doesn't lead. It's a systemic solution, probably won't get him elected or his party elected again.
Well, I think also his solution, he doesn't have a solution, because I don't know what the output it is. And he's concentrating so much on this Ukraine affair and the Russians, trying to defeat the Russians. This is where the focus is. And the resources are being used to go out there and to try to defeat Russia.
So Neil Devine says, my father and my mother were my police.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
That's a pretty wise statement, right?
In Brooklyn, that's the way it was.
Right.
And even the neighbors were the police.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think, James, as we talk about in our movement, the only way out of this is to recognize that the governments and the entire process of getting elected is so corrupt. To get elected in the United States for president, you need $1 billion. That's how much they're raising. To get elected as a senator, you have to raise $100 million. Okay. And if both parties are doing that, means working people are giving, and by the way, this is coming from everyday people who are giving $5, $10, $20, $100 donations. So politicians in the US have to raise an incredible amount of money or own the press or be very close to the press, right? Entertainers, 1 degree of freedom away from the press. So the amount of money that goes to get elected is so exorbitant that the people who get elected are not really anyone who knows anything about governance or leadership, but they're essentially front men, right? For somebody else, right? Yeah. By the time they're elected, they're basically an actor or they're a puppet for the person who gave them money. And I think the only way out of this, James, and we were talking about this. So if you look at France as a model, the prices are going up. Infrastructure doesn't exist there for the young kids, right? So they feel hopeless. 17-year-old kid, right, is out there burning down Apple stores and McDonald's, right? And then you have the fact that fertility rates are going down. You're not producing enough. The key thing is we're not producing skilled labor jobs where the person coming can make a decent wage that is going to fuel the pension systems. So this is a very systemic problem. I see the only way out of this, James, is that people need to get educated and recognize that the politicians are not going to solve anything. And that at the working level, the parents in these communities need to recognize that they have to start, if it's not a parent, if it's an adult, need to teach young people how to essentially start gaining skills. I mean, James, you've seen in our own movement as young people come in, and I'm sure most young people graduating in US school systems with huge loans that they went and thought they got a college degree have no skills. So people are graduating college with no skills and they think they know it all. So you have that may be a systemic issue, but the reality is you're producing people who have no skills anymore. And if you don't have skills, what are you going to contribute to? So you're not creating productive productivity. So productivity is actually starting to drop and you're not producing ultimately human assets who can be very vibrant and dynamic and produce. And I think this is where it really goes to, James, because those in power have created a system over the last 50 years that have degenerated the school systems, degenerated the family structure, right? Degenerated mentoring. And this is sort of the end state of it. I think this is where you come to.
Yes, even here in France, I think the first generation immigrants that came from North Africa, they were the man was working and the woman was home with the children, raising the children.
Right.
That was what it was, that first generation that came, and maybe the second generation. But now, this generation now, it's both parents are working and there's no authority, even in the schools. When I first came to France, the teacher was the ultimate authority. When the teacher spoke, you listened, and you had to get it done. The children would come home, and they would do this homework that they had, and they were very concerned about that. They had to get it done because when they went back, the teacher was going to be after them if they didn't get it done. Today, they don't care about the teacher. The teacher has no authority anymore.
Well, I know in the United States, even when I used to teach at MIT, if I gave a kid who never showed up to class a D, I would get reprimanded by the administration. Or the students started having their student surveys and they would rate a professor bad if they gave him a bad grade. And the fact that they did not do the work, that's one phenomenon. And also teachers, with their teachers unions, are afraid to reprimand kids now because of the backlash that they may suffer. I'm not saying you should go beat up kids or anything like that. Obviously that's not what we're talking about, but the notion of any type of authority, mentoring, all that seems like to have disappeared, James, whether it's in the United States or also France, from what you're sharing.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. I mean, I remember getting ready to go to school, and if I didn't, I always did my homework on time. And I noticed my own nephew, when he started going to school, he seemed pretty lackadaisical about finishing his home. I mean, it seemed like a very different generation. And so I think that is a fundamental phenomenon that's taken place when you remove power away at the edges of the teacher. The teacher should ultimately have significant responsibility to figure, and that's what it was pre-1970 in the United States. The teachers had a lot of authority. They would figure out what was the right curricula. In the United States, there was an organization called the Department of Education that got created around Jimmy Carter's era. You may remember this. And that Department of Education essentially top down imposed how things should be. And it took away a lot of power from the teachers and from the parents. Now, parents don't have powers to discipline their kids, and the teachers don't have any power. So you end up with, I think, a kid who's in a no man's land. Most of the stuff I spend time on, James, when I get young people, is I have to reteach them how to think, how to take a calendar and organize their life, how to set schedules. All of this stuff is no longer being taught. It used to be taught. And I think it's all just, some structure. All of that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to take a quick break, James. And to people out there, and we'll come right back and we'll wrap up. But many of you see James's thing says Truth, Freedom, and Health, France. James is one of the leaders in our movement in Europe. James is an engineering systems guy. I'm a systems scientist. Many of you know I did a recent video, James, that the sensors weren't able to completely choke. It got close to, I think, 5 to 10 million views, probably had 100 million views. It was called a swarm. And I described in a 15-minute video, essentially, how the elites are organized as a decentralized group, and their goal is to push inputs of propaganda, policies, and fake heroes to essentially make sure the rest of us are disconnected. We don't come together. People are fat, dumb, and happy, and that we keep thinking the solutions are going to come from them. And I think that's where we're at, James. The real solution is we have to invert this situation. There is no solution going to come from them. It's not going to come from them. So we keep thinking, oh, the prime minister is going to do something. They're not going to do anything because they have their private planes. They can jet away to their yachts, right, to wherever they need to go. They don't care if things burn. And that's what I think is really reflected in Macron going to the Elton John concert. It's a mindset. Okay, well, that's over there. I can still go and party over here. And I think that's where the world is becoming. It's becoming these two parallel worlds. And the elites know that they can always get away. And I want to just share with people, and I want to play a video for everyone. So when, I've been looking at this problem, as you know, James, for a long, long time. And when we created our system, Truth, Freedom, and Health, the goal was to really tell people, in reverence to my great-grandfather, ultimately, the only way out of this is each individual getting educated. And in order to get educated, you have to get the right education. And the education is not what to think, but how to think. So I want everyone to go to truthfreedomhealth.com, because it would be sort of remiss of us, James, just to talk about how the world sucks and say, there is no solution. We have a solution. It took me 50 years to create this system. And we have about 360,000 students all over the world. You can read their stories of transformation. But the fundamental issue is this is a problem we're at. Information is not going to solve the world's problems. The kids today, James, they have more information than you or I did, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, with a click of a button, they could get everything. And the reality is what's going on is this is what's really going on. Those in power, in spite of all the information, they feed people ignorance. I mean, look at what we just had to do, James. I think before people saw our video today, they would probably just think it's a bunch of crazy immigrants who are bad people, right?
Yeah.
We've covered there's a fact that there's the poverty in the inner cities. There is the fact that these kids have no mentors, no families. There is a pension system that's failing in France. And there's a fact that you have inflation and growing food prices. But each station, the left will just present, oh, these are immigrants, bad immigrants, right? More martial law, more police. And the right will say, the left will say, let's let all the immigrants what? Let's let more immigrants in, right? We have to be a kinder, gentler nation. But what's happening is this ignorance is leading people into desperation, which are these kids, or division into left and right, right? So they'll say, okay, we had a left-wing guy, Macron. Let's bring in now a right-wing guy, right? Le Pen.
This is what these people do now.
What's that?
This is what they're turning towards this politician, Marie Le Pen.
Marie Le Pen, yes.
Is all the way on the right, and they're looking at her now. The population are looking at her that she could come in and she's the solution now.
Right, and I think that's what happens, James. The elites create the problem, and then they give a fake hero. In the United States, they gave Obama for 8 years, right? And I just found out 52% of people voted for Trump voted for Obama. And then people went from Obama to Trump, right? He talked about lock her up, da, 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 da. And now you have all these people, it was quite, all these white working class people being manipulated by Trump. And then another group of people being manipulated by Kennedy or Biden. But the problem is people keep looking to them for solving our problems, knowing that they're not one of us. And this is a fundamental thing we all have to overcome. So when we look at this graph here, you see that where we're literally at is people are either desperate, like these kids, left or right, or people get complacent. They say, well, I'm just going to go, I don't know, just go through the French countryside and I'm just going to chill out, right? And what we've continually taught people is that the people who are presented as the leaders to solve this, you could probably put Macron here, right? Or Le Pen, but you have Trump. Essentially, they represent these people as though they're going to solve the problem for you. And when, in fact, these people are just entertainers. And that's why we recommend the only way out of this is we need knowledge. Where people, I think these young kids, James, we should actually go among them. And, we give away our program to kids between the age of 13 through 18. We should educate them on the science of systems because that leads them to wisdom. Because you start seeing able to connect things like we just did between the poverty in the housing projects, with the pension systems, with with inflation and economics. Now people get wisdom. And when you have people with wisdom and clarity, young people say, I can get active, I can get innovative, let me get organized. But people have to let go of the old way of thinking someone else is going to solve their problem. And that's what Truth, Freedom, and Health is. I want to play a quick video for people, James, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then we'll come back. James, if you can just think about as we're coming back, in the context of this, and some closing comments. But before we leave, everyone should know, you guys know that I'm running for president of the United States. And the reason I'm running with all directness is that even the presidency is corrupt. To think you're going to go drain the swamp is a lie. Oh, I'm going to go do this. It's all bullshit. The best thing a president can do is what James and I are doing right now, to educate people on the systems issues. So you can rise up and mobilize what I call the shatter the swarm bottoms up, meaning not just to take guns or something and shoot people. That's not what I'm saying, but locally learn governance, locally learn what the issues are. But you need a systems perspective. So let me just play this video, and I want everyone to listen to this because this will inspire you to understand that we have a solution. You don't have to keep running around. You don't have to go to the left or the right or vote for one of these fools. What you have to do is to recognize that the way out of this is we have to take a systems approach. Let me play this video for everyone, James, and we'll be right back.
We have allowed our country to be taken over from within, and the end goal is you will have a homogenized world where we will become slaves, because there is a condition among the elites that really thinks they're better than you, deep down inside them, that you don't deserve the freedoms you have. They don't. This reality is what people need to wake up to, and we need to all unite, working people. There's only one movement that can do that, and that is the movement that we started creating here in Massachusetts, the movement for truth, freedom, and health. Look, I've been a student of politics since I was a 4-year-old kid, studying revolutionary movements, left wing, right wing. There's a physics, there's a nuclear science to destroying the establishment. To build a bridge, you need to understand Newton's equation. You need to understand the laws of gravity. You need to understand Poisson's ratio. There is a way to build a revolution. And that's why I put this together. My goal is to train an army of truth, freedom, and health leaders. We don't need followers like social media. We need leaders, but they need training because the educational system does not teach them history, nothing. So in 3 hours, that's what I've started doing. That's the solution. We got to train people. First, with understanding what a system is, the dynamics of all systems that affect nature. The second is understanding the interconnection between truth, freedom, and health. Freedom is the ability to move freely, communicate freely, talk freely. Without freedom, you cannot convert ideas, hypothesis into truth, which is science. And without freedom, you can't really get to truth. And without truth, you make up fake problems and fake solutions, which means you destroy our health. And without health, which is the infrastructure of us and our body, you can't fight for freedom. Truth, freedom, health. Third concept is it has to be bottoms up. Working people, people who work uniting. And what the right wing has done is whenever you say working people unite, that must be communist. Meanwhile, they've let the Democrats run unions, which suppress workers. Completely corrupt. But when you look at the arc of American history, it's been when working people came up. We need to go local. Every solution I'm coming up with as a part of this movement, we're giving the science, which is the truth, and then we tell people what they can do on the ground. Like with election fraud, you don't need to wait for some lawyer. Our goal is to train people to go local, to go local, to go local, fight locally. Forget lawyers, forget politicians, forget celebrities. You've got to learn politics, and there is a science to it. They lock us down, we should be ready to shut them down. And the fourth part of this principle is the not so obvious establishment. So when you look at a system, there's always something that disturbs you from getting to your goal. Well, the biggest disturbance is the not so obvious establishment, which are those people who claim they're for you, on the left and the right. The Al Sharptons who tell black people I'm for you. The Tucker Carlsons. Do you think any true anti-establishment person will ever be on Fox or CNN? I don't think so. They both mislead working people back into the establishment. Without this solid understanding of political physics and theory, you're screwed. You're going to follow on the left wing Bernie Sanders. Oh, he said something. Or Robert Kennedy. Scumbags. Or you're going to follow some right-wing talk show host. They're not going to lead us to liberation. It's us. We're building a bottoms-up movement, and that political physics, it's a nuclear science of change. Bottoms up. We have to organize to understand that there is people who talk a good game and then look at what they actually do, left and right. I'm sorry, Sean Hannity may say some good things, but I don't see the urgency in his voice to get something done, and it can only come when you weaponize yourself with the right knowledge. You need to be able to identify a rat. You know, Christ didn't go after the Romans, right? It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees who screwed him up. His own quote-unquote people. And that's where we're at. So these four concepts I've built into a curriculum where people can go to truthfreedomhealth.com, and it's an educational program. We need to train people in political theory. You need to have physics, and I've created that curriculum. People need to get educated. We need to get educated fast. And within a half an hour, I can teach people. 2 years of MIT control systems, I teach people those concepts. Then I apply it, anyone can understand it. And then you say, oh, I got to build a bottoms-up movement. They have to get politically astute, and then they have to go locally and act, not sit there on social media. They have to act locally, defy locally, do civil obedience locally, but with knowledge on how to build a movement. Now, the Senate campaign's expanded to the Movement for Truth, Freedom, and Health, and they can find it on truthfreedomhealth.com, so people can sign in, they can get access to a bunch of videos. If they want to take a course and become a Truth, Freedom, Health leader, I offer a full scholarship there, but we want people to make a commitment that they'll study, that they'll get certified, that they'll go do activities on the ground. So go to truthfreedomhealth.com.
So James and I participate every Thursdays at 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in an open house. All of you are invited. There's no fees, there's no costs. And you can go to vashiva.com/orientation. At 8 p.m., we do our town halls. And you can go to shivaforpresident.com/town hall. So I want to encourage everyone that, you know, we've spent a lot of time in summary here. James, we've sort of talked about from a systems perspective, and you can apply this to the US. So there's a lot of stuff we can see what's going on in France and apply to the United States. But you have the fact that you have disenfranchised youth. Youth are not getting educated. They're not getting skills at the very fundamental level in these housing projects, right? That's one phenomenon. The other phenomenon is middle-aged people's, as prices are going up, that's why we saw the yellow vest protests, phenomenon 2, among the next age group. And as older people, they're looking at the fact that they may not be able to retire and may not get the benefits that they put into the French social security system, which took close to 24% of their wages when they were in it. So young, middle, and older people are all concerned in France. And at the same time, fertility is dropping, so you're not producing enough new employable people with significant wage capabilities to fuel the pension system. So you have a bunch of things converging, and all these things are also converging in the United States. The only solution out of this is not politicians, because politicians over the last 50, 60 years all over the world are so embedded they're only looking, I think, James, what we said is these short-term solutions. I'm getting elected. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get elected. And then I'm going to do whatever it takes to meet the needs of those people that elected me. I'm not looking at a long-term solution. And I think that's a critical thing here. And I think that's at the heart of the root cause. The political system is all corrupt because it's based on putting someone in office who will do what you need them for short term. Because if you're elected for 5 years, you're not looking at being there, supporting the institution because you have to get elected. So you're doing very, very short-term solutions. And so to thinking that these systems are ever going to result in long-term solutions, a system that's based on short-term solution, James, to get elected is never going to deliver the long-term necessary solutions.
Absolutely not. Can't.
It can't. It's systemic. It's a systemic problem.
Yes.
And I think that's really the takeaway. A system that's designed to incentivize people to do short-term activity so they get reelected is never going to do something that's for the long-term gain. And this is why China has such a benefit right now, but they do it fascistically. They give up freedoms top down. They have a 1,000-year plan or a 100-year plan. And so they are on a path to achieve that 100-year goal, which is very different than quote unquote democratic societies, which means the only solution, James, I see for the elites is to become a China. And this is why I think Elon Musk, when he got back from China, or at China, he goes, the United States and China are conjoined twins. So if you're the elites, you're saying, this democracy really bugs us. So the only way we can succeed is we're going to just impose top-down solutions.
That's another way of looking at it. And you're able to say that they exist to control you. That is the reason that these politicians exist. And this is the message that I'm giving out here. They exist to control you. And they're not one of you. When they're politicking, they're coming in the neighborhood kissing babies. They're not one of you. And, we have to look at them and to see what they're doing, what they have done, if they were there before, and are their deeds matching their words?
So James,
what are they doing?
Someone just put up riots in France apparently are mostly out of the Islamic migrant areas. Do you want to address that, James?
Yeah, that's where I told you earlier that I didn't want to go there because I don't want to stigmatize to say that it's the Islamic migrant areas. Right. There are issues there, and these are the people perhaps that have been marginalized because of that statement there. Islamic migrants.
Yeah, so I think the issue is, to this guy Rob Diggeldin, before even these immigrants came in, France has a rich history of mass protests that go back to the Paris Commune, right? Which were not Islamic immigrants. And I think when we do that, Rob, this is why, Rob, you should come and take the course. You will understand that we need to take a systems approach. Just like the life expectancy in the United States is dropping like this, James. And if you remember, I said this is not the vax or the anti-vax. It's a system of issues. And the elites always want us to be reductionists. They want people to be dumb. They want you to say, oh, it's the black guy over there, right? It's this guy over here, or it's a brown guy, or it's that white working class guy who's a redneck. They always want you to blame a particular piece of it. They don't want you to see the interconnections. So I think that's a big takeaway here, James. I think if people, understand one thing, and maybe you want to make some final points, James, before we sign off.
We have to be very cognizant of the point that the politicians are not left or not right. There is no left and right. They play this cinema here in France very strong, left and right. We were speaking earlier about Hollande being on the left and Sarkozy being on the right. And where's Macron? He came in as the left, and now he's in the center. But, he turns out to be a little right-wing, extreme right, because look at the money that he's throwing at Ukraine. What have the Russians done to you to make you want to kill them all? This is madness. So that's what the takeaway today is that these elites, They want to control you. That is what they want. And we cannot let them do that. We have to be able to think ourselves. And the way to do that is through system science. Learn the system science. It's a way of life. And when you know that, you can go through life and you can enjoy it.
Yeah, James, I remember when we were in Sardinia, your wife said you have 3 of those shirts that you keep wearing, the Truth, Freedom, Health shirts.
4 or 5 of them.
But I think it's a very powerful statement, because when we put together Truth, Freedom, and Health, we recognize without freedom, you can't practice real science and education to get to truth. And without truth, we can't find out what's right for our health, economic health, physical health, financial health. And without health, you don't have the wherewithal to fight for truth and freedom. So to all of you listening out there, recognize that we're going at the real problem and the real solution. Those of you want to just blame a particular religious group, or you just want to blame a particular individual or a particular, it's a right wing or the left wing, it's exactly where they want you to be. So we have created an infrastructure. We've made it very accessible. Go to truthfreedomhealth.com, become a warrior scholar. We do these talks and these videos to really educate people. Really, everything we do is volunteer driven. So become part of it. My campaign, James, as you know, for president, is running because typically you have the obvious establishment who wants to just put the hammer down. And then you have the not so obvious establishment, which talks the words they want to help you. But we are the ones calling out both, saying both of them are from the elites. And it doesn't matter what they say. We've been exposing this fool, Robert Kennedy, because he's an excellent case study to show exactly the hypocrisy. Says one thing one day, does something else the other day. And then they have it so they can cover him up. And the only way forward is us. So my running for president is to be very honest with people, saying that if I win the presidency, I will keep doing videos like this, James, but we'll have a bigger megaphone. And it's to educate people, inspire people to be leaders in their own communities, bottoms up. Ultimately, that's the only thing that's going to change people. Let me just put a banner up on that. So if you see, you can go to Shiva for President. How can you participate there? Well, separate from becoming a Truth, Freedom, Health warrior scholar, that'll last you a lifetime. It's like you're learning a new language. But here at Shiva for President, you can volunteer wherever you are. You can also donate. But when you donate, I can never take money for not reciprocating. So unlike other people say, give me money, and they give it to their friends, they take your money and they give it to consultants. We take your money and we reinvest it back in you. The content, but most importantly, we give you knowledge. You can become a Truth, Freedom, and Health warrior. So go look at that. Even on the campaign side, you give me money, I give you back knowledge and information and education, because education is ultimately the way out. Anyway, James, thank you. I know it's getting late there, but thanks for participating.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, and I wish you all the best, and everyone that's here.
Yeah.
Truth, freedom, and health is the way forward.
Yes. So people are saying thank you. Christian says thank you, James,
Right.
and Dr. Shiva for giving us real news. Yeah, thanks, James, for really awakening people to let people know this is what's really going on in France. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva.
Okay. Be well, everyone. Have a good night. Watch. We'll be doing these interviews each day. And again, every Thursdays, come to our open house and orientation. You'll meet other incredible people. And the reason I invite people is because we don't want you to feel lonely, that the world is desperate. There's nothing you can do, that you're all alone. You're not. There's some incredible people who are really learning how to really move the world forward. So be part of that. Thank you, everyone. Be well. Be the light. Thank you. All right, James, 1 second. If we just wave goodbye, James, because it'll be the thumbnail as we end. Thanks, everyone. Be well. I wish